And now, coming to you live and direct from the bottom of one of America's deeper mine shafts, it's me, Chris Demons. And what I want to know is, when do we get to start breeding prodigiously again? Alright, enough silliness. This is actually a very sober topic. I'm discussing today what I learned in our group project on nuclear disarmament. And for starters, obviously I learned a lot about movie making. We did this pretty much, as I said in an earlier video on my channel. One shooting location, a consumer grade video editor that comes with every Mac. You could just as easily have done this on Linux or using Windows Movie Maker. Those are both great products too. You know, I don't get into OS arguments. I think they're a big waste of time. Above and beyond that, I got kind of put into the role of director. I kind of handled the tasks in the group. And part of the reason I wanted to tape here rather than in our shooting location at the library, and the people at the library and the provost were very kind and very, very good about helping us make our movie, is that I wanted to show you. I told members of my group I'm not very organized. I think you can kind of see this behind me in my little home office slash cave slash thinking room. Excuse me. But, you know, one of the things is when you know your weakness like that, what organization for me, you can kind of correct for it. You can, when it's really important, you can kind of buckle down and force yourself to be a little better. And you can challenge yourself, which is good. I mean, in general, that's kind of what we were looking to do with this project, doing a movie rather than a standard presentation. But where a lot of people thought it was going to be a lot harder to do a movie, in some ways it was easier because one of the real challenges it was, of course, a huge range of age groups. I don't know everybody's exact age, but I know Roger is older than me and has a different life situation, and Beth is about my age and has a very different life situation from me. We had Chris and Justin, who were both younger than me, and again, very different lives, different schedules. So it was very difficult at first to kind of to get things together and be able to get in the same time frame. With a movie, the plan was at least that even if I could only get one person at a time in frame, we could make that work. As it turned out, everybody was great as far as getting to practice and getting to shootings and being very prepared and ready to work. So, that didn't turn out to be as much of a concern as it was in the very beginning. But as I said, in some ways this was easier, and it was definitely something different. I like trying things that are different. No one wants to do the same thing in every class again and again. It really is the first movie I've ever done. I did start my own YouTube channel, which again you'll find linked on Shoestring's channel. As practice, you can see some me playing around, especially in the first video. I was playing around with the older version of iMovie and some of the things you can do with it. I guess that was the one that entertained people the most because that seemed to get a lot of page views for whatever reason. Actually, it was kind of exciting and maybe a little worrisome at the same time because I was really getting them from all over the world, all over the United States. I had Massachusetts, Colorado, Texas, India, Pakistan, Bosnia. A lot of people were concerned, oh, your name's out there, someone's going to steal your identity, but honestly, my name was already out there. And, once it's kind of out of the box, there isn't much you can do outside of making sure you own your name and people see you enough that they kind of know when it's you, and not to mention, who knows, I'm not that necessarily attached to my identity. Maybe someone else will have more fun with it. Don't take that as a license to steal. On to the actual content of the project. Initially, we were not sure how we were going to argue. Originally, there was some talk of arguing for proliferation. I know that sounds nuts, but actually it was an idea that kind of attracted me. in the sense that I like arguing the not obvious side of the argument, even when maybe it's the losing side. I'm a big fan of the underdog. That really wasn't my opinion. I really am for nuclear disarmament against proliferation for a lot of the reasons that you'll see in the movie and in our research and in our paper. We collected, of course, a lot more research than we used. In fact, as an artist, I kind of use the collage technique, and you'll see a lot of that in our production. Gather a bunch of stuff together, then figure out what will work, what you'll want to use. I used delicious.com to kind of collect up my, the sources that our group harvested. And initially, the movie was very different from what we scripted. We were going to actually play out how the war started in the movie in the President's Dream. Hopefully, you're not watching this before you watch the movie, otherwise, that's a huge spoiler. Originally, I was going to be just the Secretary of Defense, the person who played the lobbyist dropped from class. And later on, I was going to get to play the Russian. I was kind of looking forward to that. The Russian ambassador, when he confronts the president, I can speak with a not really very convincing Russian accent, and I know one phrase in Russian because of my dad's A versus C class from way back in the day. Zadrav dovutiak tavarish, which actually probably wouldn't be very appropriate for a modern Russian to say. It's more of a Cold War thing, but basically I just said, good morning, comrade. I guess Mr. Kozwalski, I think it was. I hope I'm not butchering that. So my dad's A versus C teacher had them parade around the school saying that. And that's how they started actually every class day. I guess he kind of wanted them to see the other side of the equation, which is, I think, a good, valid teaching technique. In fact, that was something in this. We tried to be very careful to look at the other side. If you look at Waltz, I think he had some very strong arguments. That's kind of where I was going earlier. Some very strong arguments where you can say, well, maybe nuclear proliferation isn't ideal, but it isn't as scary as everyone thinks. What I plan on saying on Thursday, I'm actually taping this on Tuesday. I've been thinking about this a great deal over my holiday. In response to that, because I'm handling Waltz's arguments, is basically there's two parts to the argument. One is essentially that all leaders, including, dictators like Kim Il-jong or Saddam Hussein, even though we did not find evidence that he had nuclear weapons. It seemed like he wanted them. Or, I'm not even going to try to say the leader of Iran's name. I would butcher it. Even though they want nuclear weapons and maybe don't always seem like the most stable guys in the world, they're self-interested enough that they're not going to set off the bomb arbitrarily just for grins and giggles. They're going to just use it to deter, because his argument is that's the only thing you can do with nuclear weapons. His second argument is those guys aren't likely to hand those weapons out to terrorists because it was so hard and so expensive to get them. Of the two arguments, I feel the second one is the strongest. The first argument breaks down because you can't assume necessarily that all people are reasonable. Even here in the United States, one really sobering thing I had heard was during Watergate, there were serious questions about whether Richard Nixon should have access to our nuclear arsenal. And if we can't trust our own president, I think it's difficult to trust other leaders who maybe don't share the same interests as us. Additionally, even friendly leaders, we knew Richard Nixon pretty well, but how well do we know the Prime Minister of England or the President of France, for instance? The other friendly members of the nuclear club. And then we have places like Pakistan where they don't even control their own frontier regions really, and the government is highly unstable. That's obviously an area of concern. It has a lot to do with our strategy in Afghanistan and the drone flights over the border. Whether you're for or against that, you can see maybe the argument for why that's happening. Actually, that was another thing. I mean, events were happening faster than we could really adjust the script as well. I mean, just the other day we had the shelling in South Korea. Before that, on Armistice Day, we had a major communication outage with one of our missile sites out in the Midwest, and I, we did update the paper for that, but obviously at that point the movie was mostly in the can. We couldn't talk about that in the movie. There just wasn't time to do more shooting. Plus, those two scenes where most of our arguments are laid out, by far and away the most complicated scenes in the movie, particularly the one with Roger and Chris, where the president is talking with his chief of staff, and his chief of staff is selling him on the idea of nuclear disarmament. I'm getting close here, so I want to get one other thing in. The group worked by consensus. Even though I was the leader, we had to take kind of all viewpoints into account, and obviously we didn't all agree. These are some of the places where there was contention. In particular, initially, whether state weapons or terrorist weapons were more of a threat. And in this, I think my view kind of came out. I'm not discounting the idea that terrorist weapons are not a threat, but we don't have any examples of that. Right now, we don't know of any terrorist group that possesses a working nuclear weapon. And I think if they did, it would be a use it or lose it sort of situation. It's not something you can really hold on to. It's too risky. So I think we'd know about it pretty quick when a group did get it. But the state weapons we can see, and we can see from the number of near misses, false alarms where we thought a war was starting, we can kind of see that that's an area for concern. That's a very clear and plausible threat. Another big issue dealt with the conclusion. Originally, I had put forth the idea that the United States unilaterally should disarm. The reason being is that we unquestionably have the strongest and most technologically advanced military in the world. We have bases everywhere. Literally, the sun doesn't set on the U.S. military. So if there was a threat, we're in a good position to respond. Now, we don't have the largest military, but numbers really aren't everything, and we could have a larger military than we have now. According to the CIA World Factbook, we have about 1.5 million people under arms. 1.5 million soldiers. Obviously, those aren't all combat soldiers. There's probably 2 to 3 support guys for every combat soldier. But we could have a great deal more, according to the CIA World Factbook. We could have as many as 60 million under arms. And this wasn't seen as plausible by my colleagues. We eventually kind of compromised on the idea of the U.S. and our allies, NATO and CETO, and so forth, would disarm. Really, mostly NATO. I don't believe any of our CETO allies are nuclear armed. Last but not least, there was also, even in my mind, a great deal of contention about isolating rogue states. The question is, does that make them more aggressive? Does it even work? I mean, we're kind of going through that with Korea right now. And it's one of those cases where we just had to kind of shrug our shoulders and say, well, there isn't a better answer because armed force has to be the very last resort. The only other thing we can really do is offer incentives and protection, and that's another thorny issue in places where we have two nations, nuclear nations at odds, like India and Pakistan, that we're friendly with both of them. What do you do? And the only thing is we can provide for their defense and not support them if they go on, if they become aggressive. In any case, obviously there was quite a bit of work here, and I do feel I learned a lot. Kind of a last note in managing, that was a real challenge because I have social anxiety. Most people don't buy that, but really, it's when I've got a problem to solve, I can work well with people. It's still not my strong suit, but I can do that. When it's just general socializing and small talk, that's a real problem. That's a huge problem. In any case, I had fun. This was very challenging, and I hope you enjoyed it. Have a happy holiday season.